I am excited about the NDP leadership campaign for one reason. Sure, it's boring. Sure, it's unlikely the NDP will keep their high watermark of 103 MPs who won under Jack Layton, let alone grow to become the government. Sure, watching their candidates vigorously agree with one another at an interminable series of debates is mind-numbing. But I'll give them this. The NDP believes in things, and they want to talk about them. The chief thing they seem to believe in, it seems to me, is opposing the oil sands, which I totally disagree with. But that's what politics and Parliament are for. It's where we hammer out substantive disagreements. It's even what we call the votes in Parliament. We call for a division. That's the phrase the Speaker uses when asking MPs to vote. We ask people to take sides. Politics is not always about finding harmony or agreement or papering over differences. It's about resolving disagreements, too. And though their ideas are full of junk economics and junk environmentalism, at least the NDP is taking a stand on policy. Now compare that substantive orientation to the main debate gripping the Ottawa Press Gallery, or at least most of the NSM there. NSM, that stands for the non-Sun media. They're fixated on robots stealing the last election. Seriously, the NSM is mad, as in they're caught up in a mania. They've whipped each other up. It's a study in the madness of crowds, of positive feedback loops, of peer pressure, of pack thinking. They're a mob. It's their chief characteristic, really, not even that they're left-wing. It's just that they walk in lockstep with each other. That's why I prefer the phrase consensus media to liberal media, because they're think-alikes. And now robots are the subject of their collective imagination. In a few weeks, it'll be something else, I'm sure, equally vacuous and childish, just like it was before. I mean, mock the NDP all you like for their anti-jobs, anti-industry, anti-worker attitudes towards the oil sands. I mean, I will. But at least it's real and substantive, and it affects people's lives. This robot bubble, I'm not even going to call it a scandal, because it's just not true. It's the opposite of serious journalism. It's the media party continuing their perpetual campaign against Stephen Harper and the Conservatives. There is no rumor that they won't breathlessly repeat, no logical inconsistency that they won't carefully gloss over to keep with their narrative. Harper bad, opposition good, Conservatives stole the election, we need a do-over. It's like their bizarre obsession was with the long-form census that the Tories wanted to make voluntary, or their obsession with the unfounded rumors about our soldiers' treatment of Taliban terrorists, or the fake freak-out over a normal parliamentary procedure called prorogation, or more recently the fake freak-out over the right to have gay divorces in Canada for gay marriages done in other countries. I mean, I'm just naming a few. Sometimes it's even lamer, like the NSM freaking out that government press releases now say the Harper government instead of, I don't know, the Conservative government. Yes, that was an NSM freak-out too. At least the NDP's anti-oil sands wackiness is about something serious. Now, what all these fake media scandalettes have in common is the NSM deciding altogether that what they care about, some inside baseball detail, usually a mountain out of a molehill, is the most important issue of the day. And once that decision is made, any facts that contradict that central theory are discarded. They are a very disciplined message machine, the NSM. I'm not saying they have a central committee that dispatches talking points. It's more subconscious than that. It's their shared worldview, their shared personal friendships and animosities, their shared political culture, combined with their own boredom and fascination with themselves, and generally solipsism. That is, the only world that exists is what they see with their own eyes. And it's combined with Twitter, where 200 NSM journalists spend the day chatting with each other, harmonizing, synchronizing, lining up like migratory birds in formation. You can watch it happen in real time if you follow a few dozen of the NSM's journalistic leaders on Twitter. You can see them whip each other up into a frenzy, confirm each other's biases, give each other confidence, gently whip others into the party line. And the result is a general consensus on TV each night and in the morning's papers. So this week's consensus is that the Conservative Party made countless phone calls on the eve of the last election to deceive Liberals into not voting by telling them fake locations of voting booths. And now that's conventional wisdom throughout the NSM. Here's an example of an NSM journalist, at the CBC of course, totally reading the talking points from the media party. Look at this.
Elections Canada confirmed it is looking into a flood of complaints from voters that they received misleading phone calls, told to go to the wrong locations to vote at the last moment, harassing phone calls to Jewish voters on the Sabbath, and rude phone calls day and night to constituents. The numbers of complaints involved is staggering.
Harassing phone calls to Jewish voters on the Sabbath. That's just my favorite. Listen, but she said floods of complaints. She said the word flood. Staggering. This is her language. But the CBC isn't alone, of course. Look at this.
The robocalls controversy is continuing to spread.
And it's now expanded right across the country.
Stories like these have multiplied.
31,000 complaints.
31,000 complaints of improper robocalls.
Volume of complaints is so high, Elections Canada may end up calling in extra help, including the RCMP.
Okay, now hang on a second. Let's look at two things here. This is being read like it's a five-alarm fire, like war is being declared. 31,000 complaints have been filed. We heard that about 5 times there, didn't we? But that's not actually what happened. There were about 1,000 complaints in the last election. I'll get to those real complaints in a moment. But according to Elections Canada, a flood of people have contacted Elections Canada in outrage, not with new complaints, mind you, but to tell Elections Canada they're mad. Here's the actual Elections Canada wording from their statement. I'll read it to you. Elections Canada has received a high volume of complaints in recent days as a result of MPs and political parties calling on the public to send information to the agency. More than 31,000 contacts have been initiated with Elections Canada by Canadians. Contacts. 31,000 contacts. They didn't say 31,000 complaints. Now, what's the difference? I'll tell you more about the real complaints in a moment, but here's what Elections Canada means by contacts. Look at this. This is a left-wing vote mob group called LeadNow.ca. It's basically the Occupy Wall Street crowd. They have a website whipping up people based on the media reports, demanding people contact Elections Canada. So these aren't complaints of people being tricked into voting or some Jewish person who didn't like a call on the Sabbath. These are liberals and NDPers trying to embarrass Stephen Harper. As I showed you last week, LeadNow.ca is run by a bunch of partisans. I mean, look at their team. There's Ian Capstick, a NDP strategist who happens to be a commentator on the CBC. Here's Judy Rabick, a former NDP candidate herself, who used to have her own show on the CBC and now runs a union website called Rabble.ca. Here's Jim Stanford, another NDP activist. Here's Ross McGregor of the Tides Foundation that's funded anti-oil sands extremists across Canada. So these are these 30,000 or so contacts, the exact word used by Elections Canada, were not substantive complaints of voting shenanigans. They were people clicking on the LeadNow.ca website, sort of like clicking on a Facebook website saying you like something, or in this case, that you dislike Stephen Harper. But LeadNow, whose board is connected to the CBC, managed to get the CBC to redefine their partisan campaign as a complaint of harassment. And the CBC went along with it. So you got a fake scandal feeding fake news, feeding a fake scandal back and forth. Oh, by the way, LeadNow has plenty of experience with bending election laws themselves. As I pointed out last week, they actually helped organize a very special student voting booth on campus. Look at a picture of it. It was a special left-wing activist voting booth set up where the left-wing partisans wanted it, but they actually managed to get Elections Canada to count their special NDP poll station votes. That's a nice trick. But LeadNow isn't the worst of it. A U.S.-based group called Avaz.org has decided to get on this deal also. You'll remember them as the propagandists who tried to get the Sun News Network banned by the CRTC before we even broadcast a single minute on TV. Here's Avaz's website. They're based in New York City. Seriously, they were founded in part with an enormous check from U.S. billionaire George Soros, the socialist who likes to meddle in other countries' political systems. And now Avaz is whipping up their members from any country, citizens or not, to contact Elections Canada to try to, oh, I don't know, does it even matter? Discredit Harper, undermine our elections, whatever. Whatever helps them make money. Right, as you can see, Avaz is never shy about asking for donations. So those are the 31,000 contacts that Elections Canada has received. That has put the NSM into a tizzy. But let's take just a moment to look at Elections Canada's actual report from the last election, the one that was subject to an access to information release that started this whole robot mania. It was a 190-page report. It referenced hundreds of real complaints and irregularities from the 2011 election, most of which, seriously, page after page, were about Elections Canada's screw-ups, about Elections Canada staff sleeping in and not showing up at a polling station on time, about random acts of weirdness like people stuffing things into ballot boxes that weren't ballots. But look at page 3 of the report just for a second. I mean, just look at what it says. Quote, there was no conduct reported that would bring into question the integrity of the election result overall or the result in a particular riding, unquote. In fact, that report calls media comments to the contrary, quote, speculation. So were there irregularities in the 2011 election? Well, there always are. In a country of 34 million people and thousands of temporary Elections Canada workers across the country. So Elections Canada, in the very same report that mentioned one instances of alleged robot calling, concluded the results were not affected. Now, in that same report that got the media into a tizzy, this happened. But why did the NSM not mention that Elections Canada concluded there were no, shenanigans, no change in the results? Because that troublesome fact didn't fit their narrative. Now, I looked through the entire 190-page Elections Canada report. For example, here's just one example of hundreds of Elections Canada offices not opening up a polling station that were supposed to do. They actually had so many of these instances, they made a huge chart for dozens of pages showing just how many hours various polling stations were closed because of a screw-up on Elections Canada's part. Now, I'm not particularly worried. I mean, in thousands of polling stations, there's going to be some screw-ups. Not the end of the world. But if you were to honestly read the 190-page Elections Canada report, you would see that the vast majority of irregularities were from them, from their own screw-ups. And here's one thing you'd know, that not a single Canadian, not one, has come forward to say that some robot phone call made them miss out on voting. Not a single Canadian was denied their vote. Not a single Canadian was fooled. But tens of thousands of NDP activists and U.S. Democrats now, too, are all worked up. They're making contact with Elections Canada. No, not complaints, because they don't have real complaints, especially those New Yorkers, other than the complaint that Stephen Harper won the election. Now, I can understand that coming from partisan hacks like LeadNow.ca or Democrat underminers like New York Savaz. But what's the excuse from the NSM? Oh, yeah, that's right. They're all part of the same media party.